Here we are with video number, I don't know, like a lot. And thank you for coming today. And I wanted to talk to you today about backbends and twists.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to start with backbends. I would like you to tell us what is the main objective of backbends, both on the physical, the psychological, and pranic, if you're willing to talk about that. I know. Big questions.
Big question. I can talk all day. Physical is rather obvious, to keep the chest open.
But it's more than that too, right?
But
Because
it's
of the
more than
groin.
that.
Yeah. So
For physical, the important part is that when you are growing up as a child and you are playing with backbends, when you drop into a backbend or even push up, you tend to rotate your thigh out. This causes a problem.
physically.
And,
Physically, it
Physical.
causes a problem. Can you say what it is?
a lower back problem basically, because not only you let the legs roll out, the thigh roll out, but you are also in the process not doing what is called a double action with the pelvis, and you are doing a backbend pushing your floating ribs. Okay. Whereas the backbend should come from your upper chest.
Is there an obvious way to know in oneself what you're doing, or do you have to be guided by a teacher?
I think you have to be guided by a teacher. I've seen only one young boy I remember from my school days who naturally was doing it from his upper chest. But then one day I saw his father who had open chest also. So he had inherited something. But generally, no, you need help.
Okay. So do you think humans are naturally not lifted in their chest and they have to learn it, or do you think it's
No,
our
I don't
modern
think it's
culture?
humans. I think humans that used to live in the old style before our modern school system came up were doing fine. The school spoiled it because from very early childhood, they're asking the child to bend down and do something. That was never done before.
Right. Okay.
Okay, when we were hunter-gatherers,
Right.
we never did that kind of work. So now I would assume that most people are not farmers' children, and hence majority of the people are slumping forward in very early days. In fact, a child who doesn't do that is considered a bad student, wants to run out and play, which is what children should be doing.
There is a trend saying that, but it's a long slog to change it.
There are some special schools that don't
Yeah,
do that, but
right.
very few, and only rich kids can go there.
Right. So the chest gets closed because of the bending forward. Can you also speak about the physical aspect of the hip?
Physical aspect of the hip has to do with more cultural things. Most Westerners grow up sitting on chair or not often enough in a squatting position. Most Easterners, if I can say that, grow up sitting in a squat or in a seated position on the floor, except rich kids from India. They sit on a chair.
Right.
So they have westernized bodies.
So then their groin is tight.
Groin is very tight. I remember when we have big feasts, let's say somebody's wedding is there. In a typical wedding, good wedding, there might be 3,000 people coming for dinner. Okay? And the rich kids who come there, they look around as to, can we get a chair and a table to sit on? They can't sit on the floor. And I'm sure they look, they feel embarrassed, but it's too late by that time.
Well, that's karma, right?
That's karma. Created by their parents.
Right. So opening the chest and opening the hip flexors of the physical. Is there anything else physically before we move to the deeper aspects?
There is a lot, but I think that's the basic.
primary.
That's the primary.
Yeah. Would you mind saying a little bit about the different backbends? Like you've got backbends where your arms are behind you, and then you have arms where you're overhead, and why would you use one over the other? Or what's the advantage of one over the other?
I think when the hands are by your side and you're lifting up, the emphasis is much more on pelvis. As when you lift the arms overhead, the emphasis, relatively speaking, is more on the upper chest. So maybe that's a good thing, Westerners who have more open chest but not enough space in the groin should be doing with the arms in this position more.
So you're talking Urdhva Mukha Svanasana and Shalabhasana and Dhanurasana?
Yeah,
Ustrasana?
Ustrasana.
Okay.
And in the same kind of, with the same argument, an average Indian kid should be working much more with the arms up.
Okay. All right. So psychologically, I know backbends make me feel happy, but sometimes they make me anxious. So can you speak about the psychological aspect of backbends?
Well, why is happiness connected to feeling anxious?
Well, not necessarily. Sometimes they make me feel really happy, but then there's sometimes maybe I overdo it, or it's not a good day for me to have done it, and I wasn't as attentive, and so then I have like a little bit of, I have to calm myself down a little.
See, everything being equal or normal, you want to look at the day. If it's a hot, sunny day, either you don't want to do backbends or do them in a more supportive, slower fashion. On a cloudy day or a cold day, you can push it more. I don't think most people pay attention to what the day is like.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But then that presents a problem seasonally for people. Like, do you not do backbend the whole summer if you live in a place that has hot summers?
No, you can do them, but
You have to do them more restorative.
more restorative, or think of holding them longer, not make them cardiovascular.
Okay.
And I remember, I have never been there at that time, but in May, when it's very, very hot in India, they almost don't do any asana practice at all. Very little restorative practice.
Interesting. Okay, so talk a little bit, if you can, about the psychological aspects in general of backbends.
Generally, when somebody is depressed, backbends are recommended. Not the kind of backbends where you hold a position, but move, like even sun salutes. In that kind of work, even you are encouraged to breathe out, particularly through your mouth.
Oh. You mean for depression, or you're saying?
For depression.
Okay. Why is that?
It's like screaming,
Uh-huh.
You are screaming at God, saying, why? Kind of thing.
Okay. I haven't heard that before.
But depression, I think at least we should separate two different kinds of depression.
Yeah.
Depression that is due to chemical imbalance in the body. There, I don't know that backbends would help that much. They may. But essentially, what the backbend there does is it induces you to eat better. Okay? It doesn't necessarily, your chest opening doesn't have much to do with it. But it makes you hungry and you want to eat a particular kind of better food that creates a better balance. Whereas depression that has happened because of some event in life, then backbends help a lot more that way.
What about the aspect of something tragic has happened and you're sad about it? Shouldn't you feel that sadness, or is it recommended, like, if you're staying in that sadness longer than maybe people think you should?
Yes, I think somebody who, for example, stays in sadness for years. I knew somebody where whenever this person's mother's death anniversary came around, she would fall apart. She would actually use that excuse to drink.
And so backbends would have been a better option.
Yes.
Yeah.
I asked her one time, I said, I see that every time mother's death anniversary comes around, you kind of lose it. But I have never seen you celebrate mother's birth. And it kind of shocked her.
That's a beautiful thought. Yeah.
You can't do one without the other.
No.
We do that often in other cases also. Like, I think I was talking about it in the class also, that when something goes wrong with people, often it is traced back to the mother or father. From parents you have inherited this. Psychologically there might be, and there is probably some truth in it. But what is missed out is that then when everything goes right in your life, you thank your mother also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You tend to take credit for everything that goes right. And when it comes to blaming somebody, you pick on the mother. I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't help. Or if it helps, it's not long-term help. It temporarily gets you out of a situation.
Right. Well, it's important to know who to blame.
Yeah.
So if someone is, go ahead, sorry.
Essentially, if you want to trace it, why mother? Mother's mother, mother's mother's mother. Even ultimately blame God for everything that happens. Fat lot of good that will do.
That's right. That just makes God angry, right?
Yeah.
So somebody who has anxiety over depression, should they not do backbends, or would they do more quieting?
More quieting,
Mm-hmm.
restorative.
Mm-hmm. So what's one example of a restorative backbend you would put somebody in for a while, that they could stay for a while?
Setubandha.
On a bench, or
On a bench.
What about on bolsters or blocks?
Generally, it depends on the person. If somebody is skinny like you and I, then bolster would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
But
But somebody who's very bulky,
Yeah.
give them a hard bench
Right.
to do it on.
I'm just thinking some people might not have a bench, so I wanted to offer
Blocks.
blocks. So you prefer blocks to bolsters because of the ability to sink in on a
Yes.
bolster. Okay.
Personally, I prefer block
Yeah.
because it gives me the space I want.
Right. Right. What about? I wanted to go back to the physical on that particular subject.
Just
Go
one-
ahead.
Even for me, if I'm feeling sick, let's say I got malaria or something, and I'm recovering from that, then I prefer the softer bolster.
Mm-hmm. Depending on how sensitive you are.
Yeah.
So I've heard some controversy, or just discussion, I'll say, not controversy, about putting the block on the most narrow orientation on your sacrum, and then it's like pushing the sacrum, and it's stressing the SI joint. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have heard that controversy, and I have always felt that you cannot generalize like that. It depends on the person.
But it is possible that it could be injurious?
Could be injurious or could be not effective.
So it would probably be most injurious to someone who had an unstable SI joint, but less likely that it would create an unstable SI joint?
Yes.
Okay.
What I would watch, if I'm teaching somebody, I would watch their breath. How the abdominal pelvic breath goes down towards the floor as they come to a resting position here with the chest open. And if I find that, the breath is not going down far enough, I would move the support under them, higher or lower, to see which creates better effect.
Right. So is there any advantage of having the narrow just supporting the sacrum as opposed to the wide that's supporting the sacrum and the back of the hip bones?
I don't know. If I use a wider support, the way the shape is, it's still my sacrum that is supported. The extreme corners of the block doesn't really support the outer pelvis.
Right, but I prefer to put two wide blocks as opposed to one narrow. It just feels better because it supports the sides of the hips a little bit, and I don't know if you.
No, I think that would be
objection.
legitimate, and
Okay.
you have to have the blocks on the side slanting, so you feel sinking in between the two blocks.
That's also very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, that depends on, for most people that would be nice, but occasionally you come across somebody who has hurt their tailbone, fallen on it or something. Then if that injury has pushed the tailbone up, then being on the slanting block would be nice.
Right.
But if it has pushed it down, then it would not be nice.
What would you do with that person? Would you create a little opening for them to sink into, or so that there's no pressure on the tailbone?
There's no pressure on the tailbone. But if I want to release the tailbone back up, then I can't have them sink in between. Then I would create a support, but with like a, what you call, head wrap, some roll.
Something soft.
Something soft under it.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. I'm very curious. Like our last conversation, we talked about forward bends and how they're apana producing, and so back bends are. I don't know the answer. Are they pranically? Do they move your prana more than your apana? Like what?
Yeah, I would not use the word produce.
Okay.
The pranic energy that is there is naturally there. What you can do is to drive it into the chest or drive it into the pelvis by particular postures.
Right.
Don't think you produce in the sense of manufacture anything.
So it's moving it.
It's moving.
It's managing it or moving it is a better term. Okay, thank you. So with backbends, talk to me about that, apana, prana. Like what is the more overarching effect, if they're more active, if they're passive?
More active. Prana vayu, which is the breath going in and bringing the pranic energy with it, is more active in a backbend. So it tends to create that sense of pranic energy, which is outgoing energy.
So then one has to be careful because they can be depleting. Is that true or no?
Yes, it can be, but not always. See, a lot of this, the answers I'm giving are from some of my experience, but ultimately it depends on an individual.
Of course. Yeah, I know. That's the frustration of interviewing you because you want to see the student in front of you. But if you don't mind talking generalities, I think it's just helpful to provoke thought for the teacher to consider all that. So you're saying active backbends, you're working more on prana that's in the chest, but what about backbends that are more focused on opening the lower body? Same or?
I would look at a balance, in this sense that, the deeper the breath is, the more the effect will be on the apana vayu, the pelvic area. But that depth doesn't have to do with the lift of the upper chest. It has to see how the breath goes towards the pelvic floor, or the effect of the breath goes to the pelvic floor. That effect would tell me which is better for a particular person.
So you would have them do both and observe their breath, and then you would decide where to go from there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Not only for another person, in my own practice, how I am feeling would be determined by that observation.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And I would accordingly change what I'm doing.
But I mean, just to spark some discussion here. So wouldn't your breath naturally be shorter in a more active backbend just because you're being more active?
The breath would be shorter?
Yeah, if you're doing like a lot of drop backs, let's say, I mean, that could make your breath a little shorter, no? Because you're exerting yourself so much more than you would be if you were over the bench.
Correct, but if I'm doing a lot of drop backs,
yeah.
Okay, and I find the breath is getting shorter,
I see.
What I would do is to use the breath then to do the backbend. The emphasis would not be on a backbend posture. It would be on how I'm breathing.
Are you looking at the breath within the posture or when you come out, how you're breathing?
Generally more when I'm going into the posture and coming out of the posture.
I see. Okay.
So if I'm standing and dropping back, in the beginning I might not very actively breathe out. But if I find the shortness coming, then I will go with the breath like
Okay.
And that I find is, more I get older, the more I find that every posture I do, not just backbends, every posture I do where I feel certain limitation, I want to see how I can take the energy of the breath to that area, take prana to that area, to release that stiffness. As a young person, I would tend to push it physically. Mm-hmm. But as I get older, I want to do it by releasing rather than pushing it. Mm-hmm. And that is, it's true really with all postures. But with backbends, it's even more true.
Well, explain a middle-aged person, we'll say, who gets pushed by their teacher and thinks, oh my God, I don't think I can do another Urdhva Dhanurasana. And you do. And then you do another one and another one. And the whole time you're thinking, I don't know if I can do this. Your teacher is, guiding you. And then you actually feel amazing afterwards. So what is that? Is that just your head speaking? Even though you feel exhausted, like, I don't know if I can get up again, but you do.
I certainly had that experience.
Me too. That's why I'm asking.
In Mr. Iyengar's class. And yes, I do feel better after all that practice. What it shows me is that when I'm saying that I don't think I can do any more, I don't think it's the body talking. It's my brain talking. And over a period I learned that brain presupposes something on the basis of which it will resent doing something, which is a good thing to learn about the brain. Any pain you have, even psychological pain, the brain's automatic tendency is to exaggerate it, to magnify it.
To go into poor me syndrome?
To go into,
Poor me
syndrome. Because as a child, by doing that, you got attention. So you have learned that psychologically from very early childhood. A baby cries a little, doesn't get attention. The baby cries louder and get attention. In that process, the baby just has learned something very wrong. So then it becomes a natural habit as you grow up. Whenever you don't like something, you make more noise about it.
But I find a legitimate question in, I'm practicing and I feel like, oh, I've had enough, I'm tired. Is it truly lethargy or is it laziness, or I'm really recognizing if I go further, I'm going to be depleting myself? Do you have any guidelines for that, like for yourself?
No, I think that would be again decided by the individual in light of their other experience.
So sometimes you push yourself, you see, was it really lethargy or was I just being...
Or laziness or whatever. Even with something simple like, my mother says, I've been playing soccer outside on a hot afternoon. In Africa, even at 4 o'clock, it's hot. I come back home around 5 o'clock and mother says, can you go get some milk? Oh my, I'm tired. But as soon as she says, I'll give you 10 extra cents while you are at the shop, you can buy some chocolate. Suddenly I'm not tired. Am I really tired?
You have never offered us chocolates when you were pushing us in Urdhva Dhanurasana. Maybe you should try that.
I will try it again next time.
Just kidding. I know what you mean. Okay, so can you just say a little bit more, just because I'm curious about the apana in the pelvis, prana in the chest. You're doing more active back bends. You're trying to move your prana to make yourself feel more energized?
Yes. Yeah. And you're looking at the depth of that penetration.
And what do you look at in yourself? What do you look for? Your breath?
When I'm working with the breath, let's talk of pranavaya. Okay? Initially, the sensation is much more near the surface of the chest. Then how that ability comes to lift the inner chest, really taught through pranayama more. Okay? Where that inner height of the chest is never dropped. Even when I see my teacher kind of, tired and slumping, if I look at his chest, there is a sense that the inner chest is never dropping. It's always lifted.
Is there a case where if we're talking prana and apana, where you would, let's say somebody has equally tight shoulders and equally tight hip flexors, is there something that would guide you pranically to recommend one over the other? I know you want to look at the student, but let's just say all things equal. Do you have a preference?
No.
No. It would be.
I would look at the person, encourage them to work on the upper chest. If I find they're beginning to work there, I say, now why not the pelvis? Or the other way around. Not a particular preference.
So you've been teaching Westerners for a really long time. Do you feel generally Westerners have tighter groin area or tighter shoulders?
Tighter groins.
Yeah, from sitting, right?
Compared to an average
Yeah,
Indian.
right. Okay. So more of the back bends that focus on opening the lower body. Yeah. Okay. And then so this is a fun question, but we talked about like Tadasana is kind of the, pose you keep returning to when standing poses, and Dandasana is the pose you kind of check in for forward bends. What's the pose for back bends that equates?
Tadasana.
Tadasana. Okay, so you do your back bend, you check in with Tadasana.
Yes.
Okay.
Because in the beginning, as I was talking earlier, you are working with more surface of the chest. To get that inner lift, which never drops, is checked in Tadasana.
And going further with that idea, so are you watching your breath and energy body go more towards the spine? Is that what you're feeling for when you're watching your own practice?
More towards the back of the sternum.
Okay. And then what is your favorite go-to, and you probably have more than one, but you've just taught a big back bend class to cool people down for their lower backs and for their brains.
Again, I will refer to what I have experienced in Mr. Iyengar's class. After a very, very strong backbending class, my assumption was that he was towards the end some kind of forward bending.
Right.
Instead, he put everybody in Viparita Karni, except he says, don't support your legs, don't tie the legs together, keep the 2 feet separated, individually work each leg. And it was amazing.
Active, in the middle of the room, not with the wall.
In the middle of the room.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, certainly with the support under the pelvis, but in the middle of the room. Okay? And the experience was amazing, All the back fatigue, at least for me, completely went away.
Well, that's sort of a forward bend. Kind of. You could argue.
Yeah, but the chest is in a back bend still.
Yeah.
See, the idea is, can I with the pelvis create, yes, what you're calling a forward bend, quite correct, but keep the chest open.
Right.
Whereas in a normal forward bend, the chest would be closed for most people. To lift the inner chest in a forward bend is something one has to learn very carefully. It's not automatic.
Okay, so that was Mr. Iyengar teaching a lot of advanced yogis like you. What about the rest of us peons? You probably wouldn't do that.
No, I would disagree. It was a general class of people that we had taken from America and England. So there were
peons
in it.
Okay. But I've been in backbend classes with you. Sometimes you go for the Supta Padangusthasana, hold the toe, lift up, and that's more for the lower back? Or is it?
If after a lot of back bends, I have asked people to do Sarvangasana, then that is an antidote to that, because in back bend and then in Sarvangasana they strain their neck.
Right.
Okay? So it's an antidote to that neck strain, really.
But then you do the Supta Padangusthasana for the lower back and legs?
Yeah.
Sometimes you've done that.
Yeah.
Is there any other thing you would do after a big back bend class besides what you mentioned? Really? What twist? Floor, like laying down, or?
Laying down, same Supta Padangusthasana, except taking the leg to the opposite side.
And what, can you explain the mechanics of that a little? Why you would twist? Because are you thinking then the back bend people's pelvis has got uneven and you're twisting it, or?
No, the advantage they have created by proper lumbar action in a back bend, the benefit of that is seen in the twists. Okay? Because if you take an average person, lying down on the floor, lift the left leg up, take the left leg to the right side, they round their back.
Right.
Okay? To prevent that rounding, you are taking advantage of what has happened in the back bend.
I see. So they get a much more healthy twist.
Healthy twist.
Anything else about the twist that helps the back bends? Helps you kind of recover?
No, in that posture, if you can call it Parivata Supta Padangusha.
Yeah.
The, if I'm taking my left leg to the right, it is easier to pay attention to the left hip that tends to come in towards the chest and drop it down without really rotating the leg out.
Okay.
So that creates a better movement of the apan vayu connected to that particular action.
So is there any time where you would teach a back bend class and you would end with a forward bend? Like a seated forward bend?
Quite often, yeah.
Okay.
Quite often.
So you would. And is there a preferred one? I know you say symmetrical.
Symmetrical for sure, not a one-sided forward.
Right. Do you prefer Upavishta over Paschimottanasana?
It depends what I've done before in the class. Like if I've emphasized a lot of Baddha Konasana movement, then I would ask them to do the forward bend like in Paschimottanasana. Whereas if I emphasize a lot of, even standing poses or forward bends earlier, then I would ask them to do in Baddha Konasana.
Okay. I think that. I think you've answered this. What are the main roadblocks for students with back bends? Are quadriceps and psoas? Do you agree with that, or do you think that's people's biggest challenge? In forward bends, it was obvious as hamstrings. Is it obvious that it's quadriceps or psoas or both? It's not obvious, or
Not obvious.
so are you defaulting to it depends on the person?
Yes,
I'm
but
saying
again,
in
I will
general.
go by an experience where, I'm struggling with a back bend Urdhva Dhanurasana, and Mr. Iyengar comes and puts a 50-pound weight on my pelvis, and suddenly it works better because that forces my quads to work better. But even more than quads, the way he would describe is now you are working through your bone, which is kind of a
Not poetry.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Even with my shoulder, I remember, I'm lifting my arm to do something, and his instruction was, you are working only muscularly, move your bone more than your muscle. Now, anatomically, that makes no sense. But if I try what he's describing, then it seems to have a desired effect.
So then you're visualizing yourself working through the bone, and that feels different
Yes.
than what you were doing. Well, isn't it somewhat working with the energy body when you do that?
I think so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. How do you personally feel about back bends? Do you like them? Do you have a love-hate? Are they your favorite? Or
I never used to like back bends.
really?
In the beginning. Because as a young child, I would compare myself with other kids, and they all did better back bend. So kind of feeling like I can't do it. So whenever they wanted to do something like that, I would go back to the pelvic work and say, let's see how open your groins are. So I resisted the back bends.
Interesting. So even after you met Mr. Iyengar and did some deep back bending classes, they were not your favorites?
No, then they became favorites.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, once I was able to do them, I think one of the early experiences I remember is that after a few back bends in the class, he wanted to show people how to work properly with the pelvis. So he took me and another very famous yoga teacher, I will not name the person, okay, and said, okay, both of you go up. And this person is strong, okay, but uses his upper chest much more to do the back bend. I'm using my pelvis and my legs. So after, I don't know, whatever time it was, 3 minutes or so, this person next to me in the back bend came down saying, ah.
Right.
And I was surprised. I thought he could hold it better than I could. And he could not. Because he was not using his legs properly. He was using his upper chest.
Actually, that's reminding me of one more question on the physical. So one thing that we sometimes do in Urdhva Dhanurasana particularly is to tell the student to put a block either between their feet so they can feel that they're turning out, or put a block between the thighs. I've also seen it taught with the belt around the thighs. Do you have a preference for one over the other, or
No,
just
I
different
think I would
effects?
say for a beginner more, I would prefer a belt.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because they don't have the nuance to turn the thigh in, or why is that? Why are you saying
No,
that?
because the thighs fall away from each other.
Right.
Okay, that's more important with regard to the pelvic movement than the fact that the feet are rolling out.
But if you put a block between their thighs and you say don't drop the block, then that's
No,
also.
they don't have the ability to hold it.
I see. They go
Yeah,
up.
you are right. Again, it depends on the person.
Yeah.
Somebody says, I can do it without a belt. I say, yeah, fine, go.
Let's see.
Let's see.
Uh-huh.
And if they can do it, I said, oh, good. I thought you needed a belt, but you can do it with a block between your thighs. How about not using the block?
So the block takes care of itself. If the person's not able to do it, they drop the block. But someone's tied in. Is there any danger in that? Like if somebody's really tight and you've tied them so that their femurs stay parallel?
No danger in that. More danger is in using the block.
Why?
Because when they use a block, they will hold the block with their thigh in such a way that in an attempt to rotate the thigh in, they are untucking the pelvis.
Right. Okay. I think that's good to know.
I have seen a lot of people, particularly Westerners. You give them a block between the thigh and yeah, sure, their legs will work better.
Mm-hmm.
But in the process, they are arching their back much more.
Mm-hmm.
They are doing back bend from their lumbar,
Mm-hmm.
untucking the pelvis.
Right. So to end our backbend chat, I feel like there's a quote, I should have looked it up, that Mr. Iyengar is quoted as saying, maybe it's legend, I don't know, could be just made up, something like backbends are the boon to humanity, or something about how valuable the backbends are to helping people not age. And do you remember anything like that?
No, I can imagine him saying something like that. Again, from general observation, that most people from early childhood lose the lift.
And then
of
as
the
we
chest.
age, we tend to get stooped over. So that he was just saying it from that standpoint.
And if you compare humanity, whether in India or here or anywhere else, generally as they age, the tendency is to feel like, no, I don't want to die, I'm going to die. So it's a boon to say, die gracefully, lift your chest.
Okay.
I mean, nobody's going to say, hey, I'm going to die. But the inner attitude should be that.
Uh-huh. Okay. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you want to say about backbends? Is there anything that comes to mind about the...
If you don't like backbends, you should do backbends.
Why is that such a true rule? Why is that?
Because if you don't like them, like in my life it happened, I don't like them, so I did not learn to lift my chest properly.
Right. So unfair. Why is there never a rule? Do the things you really like to do as much as you can all the time.
You have to do both. What you can do, enjoy doing. What you cannot do, enjoy learning to do it.
All right. Are you up for talking about twists?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So,
Unless you want a break.
I do not. I'm good. So, I would like to ask you the same questions about twists. And again, we're talking about the generally healthy person. Can you speak about what the physical aspects, the good qualities that you get from doing twists? And you can talk about, if you want to differentiate, if it's a standing twist, a chair twist, a floor twist, a seated twist, a lying down twist, or you can just speak generally.
If you go to a chiropractor, your back is, let's say, hurting, most often he is going to have you lie down and twist you.
Yeah. In a particular direction.
In a particular direction.
Yeah.
So, that is the safest way of doing a twist. But learning from that as to what happens when you lie down. Okay. When you are lying down, obviously you're not using your muscles to lift the trunk up. So, in a classical twist, you are asked to lift the chest and twist. So, it's very different from lying down on the floor. But if somebody comes to me and says, my back is hurting, I don't want them to lie down for whatever reason and do that. Then on a chair, you will support them on the side. Have the spinal muscles resting. Continue to rest the spinal muscles into the backrest of the chair and then twist with that support.
That's the most effective therapeutically.
Therapeutically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like you to also say though, like so someone's not hurting, but we do twists, we teach twists.
Then they recognize what the twist does. If there is a memory of some trauma from the past, and you ask this person to do backbends, in certain areas of their spine, they will tighten, psychologically tighten. Okay? Twists are a great antidote to that. So in twisting, wherever the back is feeling tight, from there you release slowly. Okay? Not yank it like a chiropractor does,
Right.
but you release by holding that. And that seems to release not only the trauma created from immediate backbends, but also older memory is released.
So would you call twists an equalizer?
More than equalizer, they're more therapeutic with regard to psychological problems.
So can you talk a little bit about the physical differences of, let's say, Parvrita Parshvakonasana or Parvrita Trikonasana as opposed to a seated twist like Marichyasana or Bharavrajasana? Like, why would you choose one over the other, or is there an advantage, or can you speak about that?
If I want somebody to twist much more from the upper body, I would use seated twists. If I want somebody to twist more from the pelvis and they are not able to in seated position, I'll put them in standing poses and twists.
So that was one of my questions about twists, because sometimes you hear conflicting things about only twist from your waist or only twist from, there's I hear different teachers say different things. Twist from lower down, only twist from upper.
I won't say the teacher is wrong. But perhaps on that day, looking at whatever that teacher is looking at, he wants to emphasize the twist of the upper body. But somebody who says in a teaching that you should never twist from the lower body, that is wrong.
Well, the lumbar doesn't have a lot of twists, so there is that aspect.
The whole spine doesn't have a lot of twists. The spine twists accumulatively. Lower vertebrae twist less,
Right.
but the accumulative effect of it goes higher up. So you can turn more from the upper body.
Okay, so in Parvrita Trikonasana, I've heard teachers say, don't keep the pelvis level, turn the upper body.
Absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't teach it that way. You teach
No.
it with the whole pelvis turns. Yeah, okay.
If I don't let the pelvis turn. See, if it's therapeutic, somebody I'm working with a lower back problem, then I might tell them don't twist from the
Right.
pelvis. But that's not a general standard instruction.
Right.
In fact, it's only in twisting the pelvis, not overdoing it, but in allowing the twist to come from the pelvis, that I get the sense in Parivat Trikonasana, when Mr. Iyengar says, create space in your front groin of the front leg, squeeze the back leg into it, and my eyes meet his eyes, like, wow, how did this happen? And he describes it that your tailbone now moved towards the head. Whereas if he has ordinarily said, move your tailbone towards the head, I would think like,
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah.
But the energy shoots up in the spine up when you do
yeah,
that.
it does. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But you don't get that in seated twists.
Do not. Yeah, you do not. The legs have to be
Yeah.
actively grounded,
Right.
which doesn't happen in most people's seated twists.
Right.
Now, again, to talk about Mr. Iyengar, he would say, I taught you in standing Trikonasana, Parivat Trikonasana. Why don't you do the same in seated twist by keeping your leg active? Okay?
But it's not as easy. Is that what
Not
you're saying?
as easy.
So he's saying take that information and try to work your seated poses in that way. But you felt like, no, not nearly as effective.
Not nearly as effective. But when he's demonstrating, I happen to touch his leg. And I touch his leg in a seated twist. And it's like, the energy from the leg shoots into my hand. So he's obviously able to do it. He learned from the standing pose, but he applies to this. But then he applies to Shirshasana twists.
Right. And again, working the legs in Shirshasana, that's
Tremendous work of the leg.
Okay, so then I can imagine there could be a danger if you're in a seated twist or Shirshasana not working your legs enough. What happens?
You create a collapse that,
You're twisting into a collapse. Yeah.
For example, when I've seen him teach twists in Shirshasana, I almost never seen him emphasize on any particular student the work on the chest. He will let the chest do whatever it does. But if your leg is sloppy,
right, well that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the foundation, right? The foundation has to be there. So one of the instructions you've said that is quite lovely is don't twist from your spine. I think we were in seated twist, and you said don't twist from your spine. Feel like the outer body twist, like you're turning from the skin and then the muscle. Can you say a little bit about that, like why that is?
again, this is something that my teacher, Mr. Iyengar, taught me. That, don't attack your spine to twist. Move from your skin. And even to somebody, he'll do that with the skin. And it, over a period, made sense that if I try and go to my spine, my vertebral column even, and twist, nobody can twist from the spine.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's vertebral when we
But you can feel it more in the center or more on the outer. You can actually, I can.
But if I do that, then the effect I want to create on the spine that we earlier talked about is not as good, because the rest of the body doesn't cooperate. Whereas if I begin from the circumference periphery of the body, slowly work layer by layer in, the rest of the body then comes to cooperate with the twist of the vertebral column. Otherwise, my skin wants to kind of hang behind, okay, while the vertebral column is attempting to twist.
So
you can see that even in the eyes of the person.
So would you say that the spine is always the recipient of the action of the pose? Never the doer?
Pretty much, because the nervous system is in the spine.
Right. Yeah.
So you can make that generalized statement, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about prana apana for twists? Like what happens, or what might you work with twists, with the energy body?
In a backbend, I rarely get a sense that while I'm doing backbend, I'm attempting to work releasing my stiffness by using the pranic energy. Whereas in the twist, I can do that.
So when would you, in your own practice, when would you decide, okay, I'm going to do twist today? What would you be experiencing where you want to do that?
Again, I think it's partly a function of the person, individual, but partly a function of aging also. The older I get, the more I want to do that action from twists.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. And then you had a little rule about backbends, about if it's super hot, try not to do backbends. Is there any rule with twists? Because they can be pretty heating.
They would be different. On a super hot day, if I hold the twist for a very much longer time, I begin to sweat, perspire. If I'm feeling normal or well, then that kind of perspiration is fine. But if I'm feeling I'm recovering from malaria or something, then that perspiration is not good and I would not do it.
So what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that with standing twists and seated twists, the leg work, it has to be there for it to be effective. So then if you're doing a lying down twist, and I'm just extrapolating from what you're saying, that would be a more therapeutic approach to twists if you're lying down?
Okay, could be. Yeah. In fact, again, to give a similar example, if I'm recovering from an illness like again my experience in India, where I had, I was hit by malaria. I recovered from it. I went back into the class, and with the rest of the class, even standing near the wall, I was doing standing poses. And Mr. Anga told me, you just had malaria, you are going to get your fever back if you do this. Don't make the legs so active. Okay? Mm-hmm. Lie down and do the pose or do them differently. And then it's typical humor. Do it if you want to learn. Meaning, get sick and realize that you should not do it. And I said, no, I don't want to learn like that.
That's funny. Okay, so and then where do you put twists in the energetic body? Like, would you use twists more for moving up prana or prana, or it just doesn't matter because it depends on the actual pose?
Doesn't matter. It depends on the actual pose.
Mm-hmm.
Where the twists feel that they release certain locks, whether they are physical or psychological or pranic lock, then the emphasis of twist changes. In my body, again, I feel that according to age, it has changed much more.
And so you like twisting more as you've aged?
Yes.
And is that because you feel stiffer as you age, so the twists combat that, or is it more an energetic?
No, I discover more, I don't want to say discover, but I come across more intricate ways of approaching twists. Like from Baddha Konasana, sitting down and I do. I don't find any other teacher doing that. But once I happened to do that in my own body, I felt the effect was so much better. Mm-hmm. And yet, while most people like it, I know at least one of my students who was my student, does not live here anymore, came to one class, did not like that twist and felt like her scoliosis was hurt more by that. Mm. So she wrote to me. I'm glad she wrote, because then I know how, if I find somebody who has that kind of scoliosis, how to tell them not to do it or to do it differently.
Right. Yeah. Twists are often recommended for digestive issues. Do you agree with that? Like, let's say someone's chronically constipated, or like, would twists help that? I know it depends. I know it depends.
I would not ask them to do seated twist, twisting the body.
You would or would not?
I would not.
Okay.
I would rather they keep the upper body stable, twist the pelvis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I had a teacher, not you, an Iyengar teacher. I was in triangle pose, and this person adjusted me from my abdomen and turned my abdomen, and I felt an amazing turn in the. I mean, it was actually extremely helpful, and I can't do it on my own as much as I felt, but when I was being adjusted. But is that what you were talking about, like getting the pose to start lower and lower?
Yeah, whoever that teacher was able to see something that most teachers cannot readily see. But he saw that the blockage is in the abdominal area.
Yeah, right. It was, I mean, they had to put a mat over me so that their hand wouldn't slip, and they like reached in and turned, and I was like, wow, it felt amazing. Yeah.
It's what you call a precursor to doing, what is the funny pose we do, going all the way around?
Oh, Mandalasana?
Mandalasana.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In Mandalasana, that happens more or less automatically.
Right. But I would say 95% of people cannot do that pose. And then 4% hurt themselves, and 1% can do it well, right?
Because they learned it improperly.
Maybe. Yeah. But I learned from you with twists to really, the pelvic floor can really help in twists. Like, you go to, standing particularly, when you're standing, you go to where you think you can't go any further, and then you've taught to engage the pelvic floor. And like you said, it's like, you feel it go through your spine. It's incredible. But would you say the ability to do that only comes from the work of the legs? Like you can't work your pelvic floor correctly if the legs are not working well in a standing pose?
Generally not.
Yeah.
Generally not. It's very rare that a person can naturally do that. Very rare. I'm saying that very rare because I have seen one person. I met this person in Oregon, and he was very, very stiff person. But somehow naturally he had a really good lift in the pelvis. I have never seen that before.
Maybe
or after.
inherited it.
Inherited it.
So with standing poses, just a technical thing, would it be, say, you're saying how important, like if you don't have the legs, the twist isn't as good, no, not nearly as good. So I've seen people like in the trestle where their feet, they put the blocks so that they can push their feet apart to get the legs to work. Do you think that's a good way of working in twist?
Yes. Yeah.
But if you don't have a trestle, then you can only use, is the back leg more important or the
Buy
front
more
leg
furniture.
or do both?
Have heavy furniture put away from the, or tie the two legs with belt.
And then push the belt apart. Okay.
That's also good for sometimes with people with bunion toes, to properly put the belt around the toe. And
Okay, you have it around the big toe?
I have it around the big toe, the belt will cross here,
Yeah.
and then at the back it is around my ankle.
Oh.
So as I lift the ankle more, in Trikonasana I'm talking, it'll pull that toe out.
Interesting. Okay, we'll have to try that. Okay, anything else about twist that you want to say? Is there a Tadasana of twist?
I'm afraid the answer is the same.
Tadasana.
Tadasana.
Okay. Don't be afraid. Tadasana seems to have all the answers.
In backbend, when I say Tadasana is the central pose, it's about lift of the chest.
Right.
In a twisted position, I would say it's more about feeling the proper energy in the pelvic floor. So the effect is different, but it's still Tadasana.
Okay.
I think very correctly my teacher said long time ago, and I've heard it often enough after that, if Tadasana is perfect, you would not bother with any other pose.
Right. So you wouldn't have to twist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is perfect Tadasana is by a layman never understood.
Right. It's like just standing around.
Yeah.
Right? I do have one more question, and if it's too much for the video, I'll just edit this whole part out. But you sometimes teach twists where you ask us to focus on the spine and where is the lowest place of non-movement, right? Like where there's a blockage.
Lowest place of lack of breath.
Okay.
But what you learn to let go of is the binding that is felt to the spine itself. So learn to release that binding and then twist from there.
How do I release it? Just by
thinking
about it. Okay. And then when I twist, so we're saying my binding is lowest on the right, and then when I twist to the right, what am I thinking about?
I'm thinking like, a binding to the spine comes from meninges. So I'm thinking of although nobody can let go of it, just thinking from that source, I can let go of that binding. When I'm twisting to the right, and I find the blockage is on my left side. Okay. Then I learn to let go of that blockage and twist from that blockage.
Okay.
If I'm twisting to the left, I will let go from below that or above that.
Okay. And what dictates below or above?
If the upper body is moving fine, but the blockage is there, that means the blockage, the root is below that. If they're moving properly from the pelvis, but the upper chest doesn't cooperate, then the blockage is above that.
Okay. And would that way of working be the most effective in standing work? Because you've got the help of the legs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything you learn from one posture, you translate to another posture. Like we talk of leg action. Okay? Easier in standing poses to keep the legs firm and twist. In seated, it is more challenging.
Right.
In inversions, it's even more challenging.
Right. Yeah. And is there a special effect, just to end with inversions, like that's What do you get from twisting in an inversion that you don't get from twisting on your legs or on your pelvis? Like, what is there an advantage? There is an advantage. What is it?
I would have difficulty actually naming it. Okay, but my sense is that the psychological advantage is much bigger in twisting and inversion. Because even when somebody can do Shirshasana, let's say, quite easily,
Yeah.
if you ask them to twist, they fall all over the place.
Right.
Okay? Which is a disturbance in the mind. And because that disturbance is therefore, once you learn to twist properly in an inversion, like Shirshasana, then the psychological benefit of stabilizing the mind has to be better.
I'm also thinking about the pelvic floor. When you're upside down, the pelvic floor has a much easier time with movement. I'm also thinking about digestive problems is an apana issue. So wouldn't it also address those things?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Better than upright.
Yeah. See, it's a matter of, it would help, but if you overdo it, it might have a negative effect.
Right.
Somebody who has a great weakness of eye, for example.
Right.
Okay, if they do Shirshasana and are going to go do twists in Shirshasana, it may benefit them with regard to their digestive system, but it might have a negative effect on the eyes. So if there is a weakness in the eye, that person would be asked not to do that.
So if someone couldn't do Shirshasana for some reason, like they can't put weight on their neck or whatever, what would be the next thing you would recommend? Like twist and shoulder stand? Would that be as effective? Almost.
I would try that in shoulder stand. But somebody who has got a lot of weakness that they simply can't do something in Shirshasana,
maybe they shouldn't be doing.
in Sarvangasana, they are probably making same mistake.
Yeah, but very different positionally. So some people that can't do headstand are okay with shoulder stand.
Yes, if they are not able to do it in Shirshasana because there is a weakness or injury to the neck, then they might be able to do that in Sarvangasana because the shoulder is stable. But if in Shirshasana they are not able to do it, not because of a weakness in the neck, but because of a weakness in the upper chest, then that person in Sarvangasana, I don't think would do better.
I'm thinking of like halasana, when you walk your feet over, but you could have your feet on a chair, which would make it easier or more accessible for people. Just thinking of ways that people that have challenges could also enjoy the benefit of an inversion twist.
They could put the same support in Shirshasana.
Right. And then would you use the sling too? Would you put people in the sling and twist them upside down?
Then I have to twist them.
Yeah. Right. They can't do it themselves.
They can't twist themselves. Or they can, but it's difficult.
Okay. All right. So in closing, you, as you are aging, although let me just say you don't look like you're aging, so you must have figured something out, that you enjoy twists more than you ever have before. You find them most interesting. Is that accurate?
That is sort of accurate.
All right. Well, why don't you clarify for me?
I don't want to say that when I was younger I did not enjoy twists.
Right.
I now enjoy more subtlety of the twists that I did not have access to when I was younger.
I see. But you find yourself also doing more twists, didn't you say that?
Yes.
Yeah.
See, once in any subject, once you are able to touch a subtlety, you want to do it more.
Yeah. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about twists that you'd like to say about twists, or like what?
Too many things.
Well, don't say that, because the listeners are going to be like, Leslie, you got to go back now and find out what he wanted to say.
No, the level at which we want to talk, not just with regard to twists, but with all other talks we have done. Whatever I say, I know, I'm aware of, that a beginner listening to it will have one effect, a seasoned teacher will have another effect, just as it happened to me.
Correct.
Okay, when Mr. Iyengar was teaching what I thought I understood, it took me years to realize that my conclusion was wrong. I understood something much later that he was saying.
Was it really wrong, or was it a deeper level of understanding?
Deeper level of understanding.
Yeah.
Like, we already mentioned it in this particular recording that, work through your bone. Work your bone more than your muscle. Immediately that made no sense at all.
Right.
What I did find immediately was, I said, okay, since my teacher is saying it, I will try it, what is impossible. And it had immediate benefit. But the subtlety of what that particular statement means, I did not catch it for years. Or shall I say, slowly that got deeper and deeper and deeper.
Right. Well, I've definitely had that experience with your teaching, and that makes me grateful for having multiple lives, because I'm sure there's things that you have said to me that I won't figure out in this life.
Are you saying you are a cat?
Definitely. Maybe last life.
That's why you like your cat, yeah.
Yes. Well, that's my hope for these recordings, is that whoever they find their way to, is that they'll get whatever they can get out of it at the point of their ability to hear it.
Yeah, I hope it is kind of inspiring.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But some of the things we talk about, I do not believe somebody can learn on their own.
Right. Well, I'm hoping some of them will show up in your Zoom classes that are going to become fewer and fewer,
Yeah.
or a more qualified teacher than maybe they're currently studying with. I don't know.
It's not unusual that, people have this tendency, they find something and they all want to immediately start. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, the number drops down.
Yes.
Because
Well,
they can't handle the work.
that's human nature, isn't
Human
it?
nature.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for talking to me today about backbends and twists.
Thank you.
All right.